Welcome back to the home of the universal basics, the people's basics. It's time for another basic brief where we break down the top story of the week, as well as answer questions from you, the audience. Before we get into today's episode, we want to remind you all to make sure that you are subscribed, as well as you hit that bell so that you're always notified when we have new videos coming out, as well as click the description section to get our Linktree link to join our community and to be able to send questions to get answered like we are going to be doing today at the end of today's video. Without any further ado, let's get into today's first topic. So, Matthew, what is the story that we are covering today?
The story we're covering for this week is more details are starting to come out about the ongoing negotiations surrounding the reconciliation package that progressives have been fighting for quite some time now. And it's not looking great, the reports we've been seeing. There's going to be the tax hikes on corporations is out. A lot of the climate stuff provisions are out. We're losing community college. And from what the reports are saying, it's probably not going to stop there. There's a lot more things that are in danger, like pre-K and some of those other programs and Medicare expansion. And this is just a really kind of devastating blow for the Biden administration and the Democrats as a whole. This package, when it was like first floated at the 3.5 figure, really had a chance to be like a legacy moment for Joe Biden and something that could really have some momentum going into the next midterm elections. But with it getting watered down this much, it's really a big blow. And I think the Democrats got to be sweating this because they have to see the writing on the wall. Like the momentum is just tanking. It seems every day now.
Yeah, to echo your sentiments there, I think this is a real body blow to Joe Biden's legacy. I think the signature thing a lot of people could hang their hats on of something that was really new in the stimulus package from the American Rescue Act compared to the stimulus plans that we got under the Trump administration was this big child tax credit idea, this expansion of the child tax credit, as well as turning it from a annual tax credit that people get to a monthly benefit that people can draw upon. But now the proposal that's come out, and I'll show where we've gotten some of this reporting. We got this from Manu Raju, who is a reporter from CNN, who basically says some of the aspects that are likely getting taken out, such as the child tax credit not going as far, only being 1 year instead of the 10 years that the reconciliation is currently negotiating, things like home health care coming out of the package, as well as some of the climate change provisions are still being up for debate. And there's much more that they even are acknowledging that are up for debate as well. But to the point I was trying to get to on the legacy aspect, to say this thing is only a 1 year stopgap that could very likely not be able to get extended if we lose the House in 2022, which in most cases, historically, you do have somewhat of a reactionary force to a new presidency coming in. And so a lot of analysts are projecting somewhere in that like 70% range of them being able to take back the House. So to not secure some of that funding could be a real problem, notion for this signature legacy moment. And I think it's really disappointing to show that like we had already come to this compromise, as you said. The 3.5 trillion over 10 years, I should note, was the compromise position. Progressives were more than willing to come to the table and be reasonable partners, giving up some parts here and there to make sure that something could happen. As a caucus, they went from this 6 trillion ask that the progressives had down to roughly 4.2 trillion between infrastructure and the reconciliation in new spending. And now it seems like because of the conservatives in the caucus, it's going to get reneged down to closer to 2.7 trillion. So it's a little bit disappointing, but at this point, it's somewhat you have to get something and then be able to continue fighting onward after that. But it reminds you so much of like how much we need to not be so dependent on people like Manchin and Sinema, which is frankly another news story that basically came out today was this story out of Mother Jones basically alleging that Joe Manchin was considering leaving the Democratic Party if he did not get his way on this reconciliation package, and his demand being that it be roughly 1.5 trillion in spending. He says he'll walk if they don't go to at least 1.7 trillion at that figure. And Joe Manchin has said that this isn't true, but this is some reporting from at least allies of Joe Manchin's, apparently, according to Mother Jones. And I'm just curious, obviously we can speculate all day of whether he'll do it. There's not a lot of value in doing that. But I want to ask you, like, obviously this is a trump card that Manchin continues to be able to try and float, because it's like, hey, I'm in this super red state anyway of West Virginia. Like, it's a miracle that Democrats are competing here, and it's because of me. Like, what do you think we're better off having Joe Manchin as a Democrat, or would we be better off having Joe Manchin become an independent or a Republican?
To be honest with you, I think he would be better off, and we would all be better off if he switched to independent or even joined the GOP. Because at the end of the day, his ideals are very conservative in nature. He's been very concerned with the spending limit and the number on that. So he governs like a conservative. So I see no reason why he shouldn't just be more open about his labeling, you could say. And when Ossoff and Warnock won in January, we are all very excited and happy. But in the back of our minds, I think we had to know that with people like Joe Manchin in the party, it wasn't really ever a majority.
Yeah, and to me, I kind of agree, because of the fact that we could have this kind of honest recognition of where opposition lies to some degree, to say, hey, we don't really have a full majority when we have these people who are even more conservative than some of the Republicans, like Sinema as well as Manchin. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some drawbacks potentially when it comes to having the majority leader status, being able to actually make sure that you have full control over what is being brought forward. That's the big thing why a lot of people are kind of concerned about that. And you have to wonder, like, if he swung to GOP, that could be a real problem in that regard. But if he did just become an independent and still technically caucused and still supported, Schumer being majority leader, that's not a big problemsome thing, and it still allows us to kind of at least have a more honest recognition of where, like, people are standing on the issues. And so I do think there is a genuine concern if he did full flip, because I don't want to see Senator McConnell be the majority leader again, because I think that's going to make it even more obstructionary, because we wouldn't even be able to get things like a reconciliation bill proposed, because we're not going to have the Senate majority leader bring it forward for that. But him going to an independent, I think, would be welcomed in my mind personally. So I would encourage him there, but he's called it bullshit. And so we will see if he actually follows through and if Mother Jones is just rumor mongering out there. But with that being said, let's get to your questions from the audience. We've told you our top story of the week. It's this reconciliation negotiations that are supposed to wrap up within the next week and get finalized. So we wanted to make sure that you were informed of what is in and out of that package. The question that we got from you all, let me pull it up here. We got a question from Scott from Michigan. He gives us a little bit of a preamble here. It's a little bit of a long question, but we appreciate the question. He says, there's something I tend to find frustrating about the conversation of universalism that supporters and detractors tend to talk about this kind of thinking. What is so frustrating to me about this universalism debate is how people tend to think that it is strictly a left-wing and collectivist way of thinking. I tend to think of universality as the full political, social, and economic spectrums from left, right, and center, not strictly a left-wing notion of life. What do you think about this interpretation of universalism? Matthew, what's your first impression of Scott's question?
Yeah, he raises an interesting perspective on it, and I don't entirely disagree. At the end of the day, universalism is about everyone. We want to include everyone. We want these programs to be able to be across the board, no conditions, no questions asked, no matter what kind of situation you're in or what kind of person you are, what you believe. We want you to have these programs and to be better off in life. So, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think it's not strictly a left wing thing. Unfortunately, in our current political climate, it is tended to lean more left wing because the right is more opposed to these kind of programs that fall within universalism. But I would love to see it branch across the political spectrum because at the end of the day, it is about everyone.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be restrictive by the label one personally embraces. Like, I think a lot of people who might still be right wing could embrace certain ideas of taking care of one another and that we have certain basic things that all humans need. I think some can acknowledge that. But I think the reason why it generally is more associated with the left wing is that, the progression towards securing universal rights, not just recognizing it, but actually putting it into practice where all of these basic needs are being fulfilled, tends to come from a more collective approach of how do you uh, gather resources together and make sure they're distributed so those basic needs are being met and so that you don't have these forms of discrimination. If you look at conservatism long term, it has largely been a reactionary force to certain desires of advancement in society towards having certain things be recognized as human rights. Is it that they're wrong 100% of the time on saying no, certain ways we do things existingly are correct? No. Are there a lot of things that we do that are incorrect and could be improved upon so that these basic rights that we are all trying to recognize are fulfilled? Yes. And so when you tend to think about this left right dynamic, it is often kind of centered around the idea of who has control over capital, a lot of the means of production. Some people think it should be more of a collective approach where we prioritize what are all of our common needs, while others say, well, capital is best allocated by the individual. If they've accrued all this money, they clearly can produce a lot of value, and therefore they can probably efficiently allocate it out into the rest of the world. And so when you have this dynamic between collectivism and individualism, I think collectivism naturally lends itself to universal ideas because we want to make sure that all people are taken care of. The collective is taken care of rather than just relying on individuals to be able to provide for themselves. And so I think there is a really natural reason why it is considered left wing, but I don't think it should be necessarily restricted off by some labels. But I think as well, adopting some labels usually comes with adoption of certain values and certain values of certain labels like Republicans or conservatism, in my opinion, do fly in the face of certain universal principles. And so there is some degree of conflict, but I think also a lot of times people are not 100% understanding of what labels really mean. Like I know like personally, this is very anecdotal, so take this with a huge grain of salt. Like in my own family, my mom is a person who is largely a liberal, supports a lot of these kind of liberal programs, but she identifies as a fiscal conservative mainly because she just means fiscally responsible. It's not actual what fiscal conservatism is. She just wants to make sure that we're being smart with our money. And I think some people adopt certain labels without knowing fully what that like means that they're really coming into, and it can vary widely. Like obviously socialism is a catch-all for literally government doing anything by Republican standards, and then if you talk to a socialist it means something very specific. It's not government, it's like the people owning stuff and having that power over the means of production. So I think sometimes the labels aren't helpful, but I do think collectivism is related to universalism. Matt,
Yeah,
any final thoughts you got on Scott's question?
yeah, that was really well said by you. And I do think that it can go in with right wing ideals in some senses, but not with the modern model of the GOP. And at the end of the day, it's definitely something that it's definitely more leaning towards left wing ideals of everyone, equality of opportunity, and all that stuff. So it's unfortunate, but it's unfortunate it has to be so debatable like this, but it just is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, these labels do mean something. Like they are supposed to mean something. Left and right are supposed to indicate something of, morals that you have about how society should work. So yeah, I do think universalism does stray a little bit left. But that's going to do it for us all here at the Basic Brief, here at the home of the universal basics, the people's basics. We want to remind you all, please make sure you're subscribed and that you hit that bell so that you're always notified when we have new videos coming out. They will always be coming out on Thursdays and Fridays. These Basic Briefs come out on Fridays. And we also want to make sure that you're aware of certain opportunities to get additional content. We have a membership program where it's only costs $1 a month to get access to archived content and some behind the scenes content, as well as just join the premium members community. And then finally, we want to remind you all to be getting involved with some of the campaigns that we all have been supporting. We are trying to, on Thursdays, get involved in volunteering for the Senate campaigns that we've endorsed. Those include people like Alan Ellison, Erica Smith, as well as Charles Booker. We want to make sure that all of these campaigns are being supported. So come join us on Discord by clicking through our Linktree link so that you can get involved with our efforts to support those campaigns. So that's going to do it for us, folks. I am happy that you have gone through another episode of the Basic Brief. Check the article to get the full contents of everything going on this week, and we will see you all next week.